Hello my bookish friends, welcome or welcome back. I'm Elizabeth. This is Reading Wryly, and today I'm going to talk to you about all of the books that I read in September. I read 8 books in the month of September, mostly thriller and horror, generally on par with my normal reading. One of them was a sci-fi thriller, one of them was potentially a legal thriller, and one of them was a short story collection. If you feel like helping out my channel by giving me an early like, that would be so appreciated. I'm going to also separate this into the chapters below so that this video is easier to navigate through for you. We'll start with my lowest rated books as usual and work our way up to my highest rated book of the month. Like I said, I read 8 books. The breakdown as far as ratings is as follows. I had 1 2.5 star read, I had 2 3-star reads, I had 2 3.5 star reads, and I had 3 4-star reads. So generally the trend for this month ends on a high note, but I did not have any 5-star books, which is a little bit disappointing, but it is what it is. I have something I'm really excited to talk to you about today. Let's start with my 2.5 star read, and that is A Haunting on the Hill by Elizabeth Hand. I did round up to 3 stars for this on Goodreads, as I always do. If I rank something a half star, I will round up on Goodreads just because I don't want to be a dick about it. But I am giving this 2.5 stars. Mainly that is because I liked it less than The Haunting of Hill House, and I gave Hill House 3 stars. I will say I am not the demographic for this. I don't typically like haunting stories unless it's done a certain way, unless it's very well explained. I don't know why in my head I was thinking this because it's set in the world of Hill House. If you did not know, Hill House is by Shirley Jackson. This is the first book to have been published and authorized to have been in the same world as Hill House. So I was hoping that we were going to get some kind of explanation. That was one thing that I was left wanting when I read Hill House, was that I don't know why this place is haunted to begin with. Why is it haunted to begin with? So I was really hoping I was going to get at least Elizabeth Hand's opinion about why that is, but we did not get that, and I understand why, because she's trudging on thin ice here already, because she is inserting herself into, you know, this monstrosity of a writer's shadow. So I get why she wouldn't want to necessarily say anything that would change someone's opinion about the original. That said, I felt like the kind of thrills of it, the haunting aspects of it, were not over the top enough for me. I wanted them to not be able to be explained by anything else, even mental illness. And I feel like if you consider mental illness, none of this could be real. And maybe that's what some people like about Shirley Jackson or haunting stories in general. Unless you're gonna make it more existential and like haunting in a not so literal way, then I need it to be explained. That's just my preference though. I will say I loved the audiobook for this one. It is narrated by Carol Manda, who also narrates the book of The Most Precious Substance by Sarah Gran, and she's got like a really natural grit to her voice that I just love. The production level is great as well, but also they added another layer by putting sound effects in, stuff to set the mood, to set the tone, to kind of bring you in that eerie feeling, that spooky feeling. And then also there is a character that is a singer, and all of her singing parts are actually sung in the audiobook, which I absolutely respect and appreciate, because a lot of times in audiobooks that's just spoken. So it felt like it upped its game a little bit, even though the voice could have very well been AI and it wasn't anything incredibly amazingly sung or anything like that. But it added to the ambiance, to the atmosphere, which I appreciated. This story is following Holly and her girlfriend Nisa. Holly is a playwright, or she's an aspiring playwright, and she has been for years. But she's an English teacher as well, and she finally gets somebody to give her some money to produce one of her plays that she's written, and the play is about witches, or a specific witch. Nisa is a singer. She's writing music for this. She is the singer. Total stereotypical theater singing girl that won't shut up. I related to her. And they find this house when they're on a weekend getaway, and it of course is Hill House, and Holly decides that she's going to rent it for a month, use her grant money for that, and continue to finish writing, produce the play, have rehearsals there, get the whole troupe together. So they all, well, I think it's only 4 or 5 of them that include all of the actors and everybody within the play, but they gather at Hill House. Strange things start to happen. They keep seeing odd animals. They are losing time. Obviously, everything goes awry. I liked the theater aspect. I liked the witch theme, even though that wasn't explained either, so it kind of like bothered me a little bit. It was fine. I wanted there to be more drama within the characters and how they related to each other. So yeah, 2.5 stars. I'm not going to go on too much more about it, but I do think if you are a fan of haunted house stories that you should check it out, and especially via audio because the audio is great. All right, next we're going to move on to my 3-star books. And firstly, I want to talk to you about Geralds Game. This is by Stephen King. I also read this for the Losers Club Readathon. And I'll link that vlog above and below as well if you want to check that out. I'm so conflicted by this. I feel the same way I felt about Misery. Not quite the same, but I just felt disturbed, like deeply disturbed. It's kind of next level because it has to do with child sexual abuse. And so some very, very, very heavy themes in this. I would just warn you, and this is by a family member as well, so just very trigger warnings in here. If you're not comfortable with that, do not get into this book. We're following Jessie, and she is going to the cabin with her husband Gerald for a weekend away. Can't remember where they're at, but probably somewhere in Maine, knowing Stephen King, or East Coast. And they're of course in the middle of nowhere, so we do have isolation in here. And Gerald wants to play this kinky sex game with handcuffs and handcuff Jessie to the bed. He starts to do things that she is not comfortable with. And so she tells him no, she removes her consent.
He does not oblige.
So she then kicks him, he has a heart attack and dies. None of this is a spoiler. At the beginning of the story, he dies. She is essentially trapped in her bedroom, handcuffed to the bed with her dead husband on the floor. There's nothing she can do. And that's really how this story starts. And so when I was reading this, I was wondering, what are we gonna do for this whole book? Like, it's not a short book. It's like almost 400 pages, I think. And I'm like, what are we gonna do for the entirety of this story? Jessie goes internal. She goes internal very quickly. In the same way that Misery does, she has little tasks that she's trying to accomplish at a time. When she starts to get thirsty, she really, really needs a sip of water and it's just out of reach. And so there's a whole scheme that she devises to try to get some water. And so it's like one thing after the next, survival. Their door was open, a stray dog comes in. She has to deal with that dog who is looking at her husband's body like a piece of meat. She's also kind of in and out of consciousness, and this whole time we're getting flashbacks of her childhood on a specific day when there was an eclipse. And this is when it gets dork. We spend a lot of time there. Too much time there, in my opinion. But yeah, she is working out things within herself that she hasn't necessarily confronted before. We also watched the Mike Flanagan movie adaptation, and my interpretation of this story was very different. I am giving it 3 stars for now, but we'll see if that goes up over time like it did with Misery. I don't know. My next 3-star book that I would like to talk to you about is Perfectly Nice Neighbors. This is by Kia Abdullah, and this is the one that I was mentioning could possibly be like legal thriller. And in fact, legal thrillers are what she typically writes, but this one is done a little bit different. It's less legal heavy. It's written in parts, and we're following a Bangladeshi family, the Khatuns. They have moved into this new neighborhood. They have an 18-year-old son who, he's a computer whiz, but he's recently been kicked out of college for something that I don't know how early they tell you about that, so I don't want to spoil that. But let's just say he's gotten into some trouble, and so they're trying to kind of get him out of where he was. So they're moving into this house even though they can't necessarily afford it in this neighborhood. I think this story came out at the beginning of the year or overseas, and then just recently came out here in the States. But what she does so well, and the reason I love this author, is that she really gets into social commentary about race relations in a way that is so well done, because she shows you the point of view of each side, shows you what this prejudice stems from and how that comes off to maybe somebody who is different than yourself, and how that escalates and can become extremely dangerous, and does so in this case. Someone is hurt. I don't want to mention who, but somebody is hurt. They end up going to trial over this. And so there are twists and turns in here. But I will say, after having read 4 of her books now, I am really getting familiar with her writing style and familiar with the way she sets up a twist. So I was not surprised by this, but I do think if you have not read this author before and you go into this, then you would be surprised by the twists in here. She really blends domestic and legal thrillers in a way that I have not seen done before, and in a way that I really enjoy. But this is not my favorite of hers. In fact, I would probably say this is my least favorite of the books of hers that I have read. But I really enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend her. I think she's an amazing author, and I think we need more space for writers like her. If you're a fan of social commentary in your thrillers, then I think you would enjoy this. Moving on to my 3.5 star books, I want to start out with Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. Love this author. Honestly, like, she's too good for me. She's too good for me. She's too good for my taste level. Like, this is fucking literature. This is a short story collection about women and women's bodies. There are several stories in here, about half of which I really, really loved, and the other half didn't really work for me. But I can see the merit in them nonetheless. And I think just based on individual taste, that could, you know, flip-flop back and forth in many directions. To mention a few that I liked, the titular story, I guess it's not titular, but the story that references this cover. You see this green ribbon, and this is hard to notice, but it's the neck of a woman. And so the very first story is The Husband Stitch. It's based on a story that I read when I was little in one of those scary storybooks or something of the like, about a girl with a ribbon around her neck. It's telling it in a different way. It's telling it in a more nuanced way. And it's about her agency and how, even though her partner is so curious about this ribbon around her neck and wants to touch it and wants to move it, it's not up to him, because it's part of her, it's part of her body, and she has the agency to decide whether or not she's going to remove that ribbon. There's another short story in here. Probably the most well-known one in this is the Law & Order SVU short story. That is called Especially Heinous. It's 272 views of Law & Order SVU, and when I say views, it is essentially broken up. Each episode title is written out. She writes a new synopsis for the already existing title of each episode, 272 of them. Throughout those synopses, she's telling a story. She's telling her own story. And in this story, we are following Stabler and Benson from Law & Order SVU, except Benson has women who have been killed, who haunt her in her apartment at night and who have bells for eyes, and they want something from her. They both have these odd doppelgangers that are trying to take over their cases, and it's just really odd and strange. It felt very fragmented. It felt very deconstructed, because it was. So it wasn't my style of story, but I think it was very creative, inventive, and it's literary AF. Another one that I really liked was called 8 Bites, and this was about a woman who, her mother, for every meal for her entire life, as long as she knew her, only took 8 bites of any meal. And she was so in awe of her mother's restraint that she would just never think twice. It was 8, and that was it. It was done. She always had a very slim physique, and so she wanted to do this as well. All of her sisters have gotten this surgery that was, if not exactly, then similar to gastric bypass surgery. But in this world, she finds that by getting this surgery, she is giving away more than just a piece of her stomach. And there is a price to pay that she did not know when she got into it. And so the exploration of that is, you know, women and how we feel about our bodies and what we are giving away by trying to make our bodies look a certain way to other people. Just brilliant. I highly recommend it. I would keep this cover and this copy forever on my shelves because I think it's beautiful. I think she's beautiful. A lot of really amazing queer rep in here as well. So just very highly recommend. My next 3.5 star is Bridge. This is by Lauren Bukes. This one is the one that I mentioned was a little bit more on the sci-fi side. This does have to do with the multiverse, multiple universes, etc. We're following Bridget. Her mother was a very famous neuroscientist, and her mother believed that she could jump between realities with this thing called a dream worm. Bridget's mother dies, and she finds this dream worm and is trying to find another reality in which her mother is alive to figure out her life and unravel her past. And it's kind of like a coming of age thing. There is her best friend who is a non-binary character in here, and I love the non-binary rep because it's not preachy, it's not explained, it's just like, hey, this is reality and there are people in it who are different. So I really love that. It kind of gives me Blake Crouch energy with the sci-fi aspects of this. There is a specific hook in here that I really want to tell you, but I feel like it's a little bit of a spoiler, so I'm gonna hold back on that. But if you're interested in Blake Crouch and you want something that is very self-exploratory and feminist, then I would say give this a shot. It is, again, on the longer side. Probably could have been a little bit shorter. The science aspect of this veers slight fantasy. I want to call it a magic system, but it's not. But the way you travel through the universes with this dream worm is just really odd. And I think it's very creative, imaginative, inventive. I like the world building, and I enjoyed this one. Let's move on to my 4-star books. I have 3 of them. Very excited to talk to you about each one of these. And the first one I want to discuss was actually the Midnight Society Book Club book pick for the month of September. If you're not aware, I do have a free online book club. It is called the Midnight Society Book Club. You can follow me on Instagram. It's totally free. You just read the book with us, and then at the end of the month, I get a live show together with some co-hosts, and we all discuss the book. That's essentially it. This month, we are reading Rouge by Mona Awad with Kayla from Books and Lala and Stephanie from Books in the Freezer. So last month, we read Good Bad Girl. I discussed this with Haley from Haley Hughes, as well as Michaela from Michaela Reads, and we had a really awesome discussion about this story. So if you want more in-depth detail, I will link that live show. You can always go back and watch it. I'll link it above and below so that you can reference that. Funnily enough, Gabby read this for her book club this month as well for the book troop, and her, Ashley, and Marcy had differing opinions than us, which I love. So maybe go watch both of them and see what you decide. I think if you are a fan of Alice Feeney and you're used to getting just kicked in the butt by her twists, then you may not appreciate this one as much. If you don't like older Alice Feeney and you like her writing in Daisy Darker, I think you will like this one because it's got that same nuggets of wisdom in here every so often that I really appreciate, and I can totally understand if that might feel cheesy to some people, but for me, it just works. I love it. I love dissecting this idea of good and bad. Sometimes good people have to do bad things in order for everything else to make sense, in order to right a wrong. We're exploring that idea, and that discussion is really interesting to me. We're following these 4 women who are all connected somehow. We don't know at the beginning how they are connected, but the synopsis is that there was a baby that was in a stroller however many years ago that was stolen from a supermarket. Modern day, there is a murder in a care center, care home, nursing home, and somehow they're connected. We're following Edith, who is living at this care home. She's an older lady. She is kind of crotchety and funny. I really liked Edith. We're following Patience, who is one of her nurses, her caretakers. And Patience is the only one Edith likes, but Patience has also been lying to Edith for their entire friendship. We're following Cleo, who is Edith's daughter. And then we're also following Frankie, who we don't really know how she's connected. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to go into about this. There are some amazing quotes in this book. I think she gets better and better. And this one is more of a mystery suspense. It's about women and generational trauma. It's about morality and what it takes to be happy. If you're interested, check it out. If you want more detail, watch the live show. The next book that I want to talk to you about is Delicate Condition. This is by Danielle Valentine and it came out in August. And this is actually what the new season of American Horror Story is based on. It's called Delicate and it's based on this book. I think there's 2 or 3 episodes out now, so if you're interested, check that out. They do a good job with the adaptation. The story is about Anna Alcott. She is an actor and has been for 20 years or so, but she's had little success until recently, and now she's in a movie that is potentially being nominated for an Oscar. She's starting to get recognized in the streets, but she's also in the middle of her journey trying to get pregnant and have a baby. This story is
Pregnancy horror.
although I call it pregnancy horror because at the root of it, it is, but this reads like a thriller, so just keep that in mind. So she and her husband Dex have been trying to get pregnant for a while, and she's doing IVF. And she is convinced that there is some sinister figure that is trying to keep her from getting pregnant. She's got this weird person online that is kind of stalking her. Her appointment times are getting changed in her calendar. Or she could have sworn that she had put down a different time for the appointment and that she missed it. She's starting to doubt her own self. There is definitely some gaslighting happening in here, but honestly, it didn't trigger me. So if that is a trigger for you, you know, this might work for you too. Eventually, she has to leave Brooklyn and go to the Hamptons in the dead of winter to just feel safe with her husband. And it's here that she is told she's had a miscarriage, yet she is convinced she still has, you know, something growing in her stomach. Now, we're also getting interspersed chapters with the points of view of women throughout history who are also a little bit on the older side, late 30s, at least for childbirth, my age, essentially. They're having some weird stuff happening with their pregnancies, and we don't necessarily know how these ladies are connected to her until the very end. I was having a great time through most of this, but it wasn't standing out to me until the last like 25% or so. I really that's what got me, was the last 25%. I love where this went. It ended up having much more social commentary about women's bodies or anybody with a uterus that could potentially get pregnant or bear a child. That idea that, you know, you just become a vessel for this being. There is real legitimate horror within that. You know what I mean? There's one scene in here in the car. If you've read this, then you probably know what I'm talking about, where we get one thing happening, multiple ideas of what that thing is, and it's almost like this dreamscape nightmare unfolding, and I really loved that scene. And from that point on, I was like, okay, I'm in. You got me. So I am giving this 4 stars. I definitely recommend this, especially if you want to watch that adaptation. Yeah, give it a try. I think it's a really, really good thriller that came out this year. And then the last book that I want to talk to y'all about today is Dear Child. This is by Romy Hausmann. This has been translated from German. So it was originally written in German and was a huge sensation over there. This is being compared to The Room meets Gone Girl. And I know the second you say Gone Girl, like it's at this point, you're like, really? Because after Gone Girl came out and it was just did that thing that it did, so many people were looking for that. So many books came out with that comparison, and to the point where I became very skeptical. But this one, I can absolutely see why this has been compared to that. And I think those comp titles are apt. When this book starts out, we're just following this mother and her 2 kids. They're just going about their daily lives, and then she kind of in an offhand way mentions that she wants to kill her husband. And so right then you're like, okay, what's the situation here? Lena and these children are being held captive. The children have lived there their entire lives. They know nothing else other than this. Lena one day runs away, runs into the street, gets hit by a car. She's sent to the hospital in an ambulance, and in the ambulance is her daughter. It's hard to explain this, like to get around all of the spoilers, but also give you an idea of what the hell is happening in here. We're also following this point of view of this older couple who lost their daughter Lena years and years ago, and their friend who was the detective on the case trying to find Lena. So there is kind of that crime thriller aspect to it, but also like domestic thriller. It's kind of a blend of the two. The little girl, I can't remember her name, but the little girl that we're following, we also get her perspective, and she's very interesting. If you liked Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent and you liked the character of Sally, I think you're going to be interested in this little girl because she's so smart, but she only knows what she's been taught. And so the juxtaposition when she is in the real world in the hospital with Lena, she's trying to make sense of the things that she's seeing around her that she's never seen before. It makes her come off as very innocent and very naive, which she is, but also just a little bit odd. This older couple comes to the hospital to identify Lena and come to find out it's not her. It's not that they're Lena, but they get a glance at this little girl, and the little girl is the spitting image of Lena. So what?
What is happening?
You know, what? How? All of this unravels. This is a heinous man who has kept them captive. And there is a scene in here that I liken to Pretty Girls. Kind of a torture scene that very much took me back to that scene, that torture scene in Pretty Girls that was very disturbing. If you like that kind of creepy, like serial killer, like this could happen in real life horror type thing, if you liked Strange Sally Diamond, if you like The Quiet Tenant, that kind of horror, then I think you will like this. Even though I don't know if I would consider this horror, I think it's a thriller. And also there's an adaptation for this that is out. Another thing about that I'd like to mention is that when I did watch the adaptation after I read this, I could see where some things had been lost in translation in the book. There are just some things, the more translated books that I read, there are some things that cannot be translated. Like every word can be on the page and you're still missing a nuance. You're missing a tone, an emotion, an underlying kind of emotion. And that comes through so much better on a visual medium where you can have, you know, music to set the tone and set the tone with the lighting and play with so much more visually. So I got something out of that I did not get out of here, but nonetheless, just by itself, really, really loved this. And I think a lot of you are going to like this. Dear Child by Romy Hausman. It's really good. And that is it. Those are the 8 books that I read in the month of September. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you watched this to the very end, why don't you give me a house emoji for Dear Child? Let me know what your favorite thing that you read recently was. I know this video is a little bit late in the month. I typically like to have my wrap-ups out in the first week of the next month. So we're a little bit behind this time, but just let me know what the most recent 5-star read that you've had. And that's gonna be it for me today, y'all. Don't forget that life is short, so read Wryly. Cheers and goodbye.
Ever